I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to share something like this publicly, but maybe telling my story will help someone else who feels as confused and broken as I do. It all started on what seemed like an ordinary Friday evening. My husband, Daniel, had an office dinner, the kind of formal event where spouses were expected to show up. I didn't want to go. I was tired, stressed from work, but Daniel insisted. He said it was important for me to meet his boss, Richard. Richard was someone I'd only heard about in passing. Daniel described him as charismatic, powerful, and a little intimidating. And he wasn't wrong. When we walked into the restaurant, Richard was already at the head of the table, commanding the room without even raising his voice. He greeted me warmly, maybe too warmly, his eyes lingering just a second longer than they should have. I brushed it off. People in positions like his often have a way of making others feel seen, important. I told myself it was nothing. Dinner went on, and I noticed Daniel drinking more than usual. By the end of the night, it was clear he wasn't in any condition to drive. I was about to call a cab for us when Richard leaned in and said, "Don't worry, I'll take her home." Daniel laughed, waved his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, and said, "Yeah, sure." "Thanks, man." I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to say no, but Richard was Daniel's boss. It felt awkward to refuse, and honestly, Richard had been nothing but polite up to that point. So I got in the car. At first it was fine. We talked about small things, my work, our neighborhood, even the weather. But then halfway through the drive, he took a turn not toward our house. I felt my chest tighten. I think you missed the street," I said, trying to sound calm. Richard glanced at me, smiled faintly, and said, "I know." That's when my heart sank. He pulled the car over into a quiet side road, the kind of place where no one would notice a parked car. My mind raced with 1,000 worst-case scenarios. But then he didn't touch me. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned back, sighed heavily, and said something I never expected. "You deserve better than Daniel." I froze. His words felt like a punch to the stomach. He went on, telling me things I didn't want to hear, how Daniel talked about me at the office, how careless he was with his drinking, how he supposedly flirted with a coworker at last month's conference. I wanted to scream at him, to call him a liar. But the problem was, deep down, part of me knew there was truth in what he said. Daniel had been distant for months. Our arguments had become routine. There were nights he didn't come home until long after midnight, claiming he was working late. Still, hearing it from Richard, his boss, of all people, felt like betrayal stacked on betrayal. I told him to take me home. My voice was shaking, but I tried to sound firm. To his credit, he didn't argue. He just nodded, started the car again, and drove me the rest of the way in silence. But before I got out, he said one last thing. "You'll see soon enough. And when you do, remember that I was honest with you." I slammed the door and walked inside, my whole body trembling. Daniel was already passed out on the couch, completely oblivious. I wanted to wake him, to demand answers, but instead I stood there, in the dark, staring at the man I thought I knew, wondering how much of our marriage was built on lies. That night I barely slept. Richard's words echoed in my mind, mixing with memories I'd been trying to ignore, the secretive texts. Daniel quickly closed when I walked into the room, the faint smell of perfume that wasn't mine on his jacket, the way his eyes seemed to glaze over when I spoke to him. The next morning, I confronted him. At first, Daniel laughed it off, saying Richard was probably just trying to stir trouble. But when I pressed harder, when I told him about all the little things I'd noticed, the color drained from his face. He didn't admit to anything outright, but he didn't deny it either. His silence was worse than any confession. That's when I realized my marriage was already broken, long before that car ride. Richard hadn't caused it. He'd just pulled the curtain back. I wish I could tell you that I had some neat, happy ending to this story, that I walked away with my head held high, or that Daniel and I worked things out. But the truth is, I'm still in the middle of it. I'm still picking up the pieces, still trying to decide whether to fight for what's left or finally let go. What I do know is this: sometimes the betrayal isn't in a single act. It's in the little cracks that form, over time, the trust that quietly erodes, until one day you realize you're standing in ruins. So if you're listening to this and you feel that same gnawing doubt I felt, don't ignore it. Don't wait for someone else to confirm what your heart already knows, because the ride home that night may have been